Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to make your own corset liners. So the first thing you need to do is take your measurements if you haven't already. Now you can take your measurements with or without your corset on, but when you're adjusting the measurement of the waist, make sure that the waistline of the liner is what your waist is going to be when it's inside of the corset. That way when you are putting your liner on, it will stretch to your natural waist measurement, but as you tighten your corset down, then your liner is not going to wrinkle at the waist, rather it's going to contract with the waist so that it will stay smooth. So let's start with the horizontal measurements. Firstly, if you're making an underbust corset, then measure right beneath your bust line. So right there, mine says 31. Now if you're going to measure yourself for an overbust corset, your liner will probably want to be above your bust line like this. So put it right underneath your armpits and measure around here. So right here it says 35, and don't make it your largest bust size because you want it to stay up on you. You don't want it to be constantly sliding down. Next, take your waist measurement, whatever that may be, and if you're taking your natural waist measurement, then subtract however many inches you're going to be with your corset on, and if you're wearing a corset, then just measure your corset measurement. And then today I'm 26 because I am a little bit bloated today. And then measure your hips. So that says 37, and don't put any contraction on that. Don't take off inches because you don't want it to be too tight around. Next, measure from your underbust to your waist. So that's about 6 inches, and then from your waist to your hips. So that is 5.5 inches. Now write those down and let's get started picking out our fabrics. Alright, so what I have here are 3 different types of fabrics. Right here is your typical spandex that I got from a fabric store. So you can see it's very stretchy in all directions. And another fabric I have here is a cotton jersey. So it breathes a little bit and it still has some stretch to it. Lengthwise, it doesn't have very much stretch. So you can see here's the selvage. Lengthwise, not that much stretch, but widthwise, it is actually quite stretchy. Actually, the stretchiest part of any fabric is along the bias. So the bias is along the 45-degree angle. So if this is the selvage and this is the cut side, the bias will be here or here. And whenever you're choosing what kind of fabric you're going to be using for your corset liner, make sure that it has enough stretch to it. So I would probably recommend that your liner material should have between 40 and 50% stretch along the bias. So that means if you take a 10 centimeter piece and stretch it along the bias, it should stretch to 14 or 15 centimeters. So you can see this is a pretty good option for you. And this, I think, is a nylon jersey. I think so because it has a bit of more of a sheen to it, and it doesn't breathe quite as well. And once again, this one is made with only one-way stretch. And it's still suitable if you want to use it because it stretches at least 40% on the bias, like that. But I would still recommend that you use some sort of material that breathes better. So choose more natural fibers if you can. So what I'm going to use here is this cotton jersey, and the first thing I'm going to do is just cut out a section that is the same length as my torso. So if you remember, from underbust to hips, when I did my measurements, was 11.5 inches. So I'm just going to measure that out here, and then I'm going to cut it out. Actually, I'm going to add an extra inch just so I have a seam allowance, so 12.5 inches. So what you're left with is this long strip of fabric, and the length that this strip is going to be is the widest circumference that you have on your body. So in my case, that was 37 inches. So I'm just going to measure 37 inches here, and I'm going to add an extra inch just for a seam allowance. So that makes 38. And then cut at that point. So when you're done, you should be left with this. So fold it in half and clean up any raw edges. Next, you want to mark your measurements on here. So if this edge is going to be your hip measurements, then up here is going to be your underbust measurement. And if you remember, my underbust measurement was 31. So I'm going to measure across 15.5 inches and mark it right there. And that is going to be where I'm going to sew. But remember that I'm still going to leave a little bit extra for seam allowance there. Next, I'm going to go down 6 inches to where my waist measurement is going to be, plus another ½ inch for the seam allowance that I had left before. And here's my waist measurement. And at my waist, I measured 26 inches, but I was measuring over my corset. So I'm going to take off an inch. So let's say it was 25 inches. So half of 25 is 12.5, right there. And just making sure everything is neat in place. It's another 5.5 inches down to the hips, plus another ½ inch of the seam allowance that I had left over. So that's 6 inches, so that's measured perfectly. Next, just connect your measurement marks and try and make it curved slightly so that you will have a smooth seam line. The last part, and you don't have to do this, but I like to, is to shorten these edges a little bit, because you'll notice that if it's 6 inches from here to the waistline, over here it's going to be a little bit longer than that. It's 8 inches here, because if you imagine it is on a diagonal, the hypotenuse of a triangle is going to be a lot longer than the side of it, right? So you want to measure out 6 inches here. And you're going to just taper that off. Also do it from the waist to the underbust. So it's going to be 6.5 inches. And this side is actually not too bad. And just taper it off just a little bit. Now remember, that is optional. The reason that I like to do it is so that in the back where you have the seams, then the liner is going to go straight across instead of going up into a point like this at the top and down into a point like that at the bottom. Now you're going to cut it out. So you should have a shape something like this that opens up this way. So line up the edges once more and pin on this outer edge here, opposite to the fold. So I'm going to be sewing with black thread so that you can see where my seams are, and you want to set your sewing machine so that you do a zigzag seam and sew along where you pinned, keeping a ½ inch seam allowance. If you want to, you can trim the seams if you like, and if you're worried about it fraying, then you can serge it. However, most stretchy fabrics are usually a knit, so they won't fray. When you're done, open up your liner, and then what you're going to do is fold over the raw edges around the circumference, around your underbust and your hip area. Fold it over ½ inch, pin it in place, and once you've pinned this in place, go ahead and sew it down at the edges, once again using a zigzag stitch, stretching as you go along. So there you go, that's one edge, and now I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom edge here. Now when you're done, you should be left with something like this. Now you can wear it right side out like so that you have the seam on the inside. However, because this is going to be hidden underneath all of my corsets, I like to wear it with this seam side out, with this thing facing the corset instead of my skin so that it doesn't irritate me. And it's not really going to show anyway. Remember, your liners, they don't have to be pretty, they just have to be functional. When your liner is flat, it will look something like this. It'll have a curve in the middle of it. And this is what it looks like on. When I usually wear it, I like to have the seam in the very center back. I find that is the least irritating for me. And if I'm going to be wearing a corset with a modesty panel in the back, then it's not going to show underneath. However, if I'm going to be wearing a corset that doesn't have a modesty panel, then I'll usually put this over to the side, like so. So I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below or send me a message. And I will talk to you all in the next video. Bye!